All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. All right. And we've got a pretty small group for AP Euro. So let's just go ahead and y'all go ahead and get your questions in. I'm not even going to worry about a poll, or if you want to just tell me in the chat what you're studying right now. And we'll go ahead and get on this. So let's go ahead and get your questions asked, and we will, we'll get those addressed. All right. Okay, we got some folks here. I know Nora and Liam, they keep showing up for these things. Excellent. Good to see y'all again. Very good to see y'all. All right. So, yeah, y'all get your questions in and let's go ahead and get our discussion started and see what everybody's got in mind. All right. All right. Let's see what we've got. Still no questions. All right. Alyssa, welcome. Welcome. Okay. Still waiting on some folks. We got y'all here. Let's ask some questions. Let's get some questions asked. Come on, y'all. All right. Come on, come on. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Get those questions in there. All right. I'm sure. Even though, Bry is not really like something that is um, really that immediately relevant to the AP Euro exam. He's probably the least relevant of any of them. But as far as that goes, we'll go ahead and get into that. Okay. So let's see what we've got here. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that going. All right, so we got a few questions now. Now, first of all, was there any pseudoscience perpetrated during the Okay, Dylan, I have no idea. Dylan, come on, man. Like, what are we talking about here? All right, it looks like that one just went away. Maybe he deleted his own question. I don't know. Okay, but can I explain enlightened absolutism? Yes. Okay, so really for enlightened absolutism, you've got the Enlightenment, you got absolutism, you put them together. All right. So, as far as the Enlightenment, okay, we think about the values of the Enlightenment, and especially as we get closer to another election. I want y'all to think about the Enlightenment because the Enlightenment is about using your reason, using your sense of reason, your rational capabilities, and stepping back, like not putting emotion into it. But think about how politicians, like, how they're politicking now, and it really, when you listen to what the speeches that people make before an election on both parties, I'm not going one or the other here, but both parties, they are really just trying to scare people. Like, they're trying very, very hard to scare people, and they do that by catering to people's fears. And so really, we don't really see a lot of reasoned discourse. But if you think about this, that the Enlightenment is about the promotion of science, the promotion of rational thinking, the idea of progress. Okay, so we value progress over stability. All right, so these are some things that are about the Enlightenment. And when it comes down to it, the enlightened absolutists, there are really three of them. Okay, so you're dealing with Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and Joseph the Second. Okay, so Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and Joseph the Second. And so these are the three. Now you've got really some things as far as what they're doing. And I've got a video on this where it's a lot more formal. But let me just go ahead and pull that up so that y'all can have something to look at. It's always a little more, especially these 9 p.m. things. By the way, next week is going to be, we're going to do this on Tuesday because Wednesday night is Halloween. Okay. So that's going to be on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. And so as far as this goes, okay, so let's go on to this one here, the auto recover. Okay. All right. No, 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 no. Okay. My goodness, people. This is all right. So let me see if this will save here. All right. Let me go ahead and do a little sharing there. So let's go ahead and share our screen. All right. Okay. So the thing is, if we think about the values of the enlightened, you know, emotion, tradition, stability, regulation, and intolerance, that there's a natural tendency for people to think primarily with their emotions, to cling to tradition, even if that tradition doesn't really make sense. But it's because it's the way that we've always done it that contributes to stability. People who are looking for stability often they pursue regulations. They want rules and all of that kind of stuff. And people tend to be intolerant. There's a natural tendency we all have, okay? And if you're honest with yourself, I mean, just get into an argument with somebody online, you realize there's just part of you that is thinking about like, let's yeah, there's part of you is thinking, wouldn't it be great if the other side just went away? Okay, if the other side just went away. But at the same time, when you look at the values of the Enlightenment, really more of a worldly thinking, kind of a realism, that reason instead of emotion, science instead of tradition. So it's like if we learn something empirically or we reason something out that says that we've got something better than this tradition, then we're going to make progress. It's not just going to be a pursuit of stability. And instead of regulation, which is designed to keep things stable and ordered, what the Enlightenment philosophers wanted was liberty, all right, that people should have the freedom to do whatever they're going to do. And then, of course, a toleration of people who think differently than others, okay? So this sort of thinking goes into the Enlightenment. Now, as far as absolutism, we've been over that, and y'all know what we're talking about here. Enlightened absolutism, okay? So it's really absolutism with some of these Enlightenment values kind of put into there. And so as far as that goes, remember Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and Joseph II, or Joseph the Not So Great, okay? And so basically they're going to apply the principles of the Enlightenment in their kingdoms, but from the top down. Okay. Now there were a lot of philosophers who claim that, this is really the only way we're going to be able to do this, because if we don't do it this way, okay, so if we don't have a strong monarchy, we can't really impose enlightenment from below. So it's this top down approach to imposing enlightenment, because the idea here, remember that in the Enlightenment there is a degree of elitism. There's a degree of elitism. There is a degree of the masses will not enlighten themselves. Somebody's going to have to do it for them. Voltaire would have made a terrible Marxist, thinking that people were going to just rise up. And so Frederick the Great wrote to Voltaire on one occasion, "Let us admit the truth. The arts and philosophy extend to only the few. The vast mass, the common people, and the bulk of the nobility remain what nature has made them. That is to say, savage beasts." Wow. And if we think about Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. All right. So basically what you're dealing with here now, all of the enlightened absolutists, they have like a combination of these. All three of them aren't doing all four of these, but they are doing something here. Okay, so first of all, toleration of religious minorities. If there are religious minorities, it's okay. And this is kind of, remember, a novel idea of the Enlightenment that some people had tried before, but the Enlightenment's bringing this to a kind of mainstream sort of thing here. Reform of institutions, absolutism, okay, and patronage of the philosophers. And so, as far as that goes, we've got here Catherine II, Frederick II, Joseph II. Remember that Catherine II, Frederick II, each have the Great. Okay, so Frederick the Great was really the most. He was the most successful. He was widely seen as the most successful. He called himself the first servant of the state. Okay, so it's like the ruler's job is actually to serve the state, not to be a divine right monarch. He wrote early in his reign a treatise against Machiavelli, because remember, Machiavelli is about the end justifying the means. And so that is something that, Frederick's like, no, a ruler has a responsibility to do what's best for his people. Whereas, remember, Machiavelli is writing about how to maintain power. Okay. And so patronage. Okay. Frederick corresponded with Voltaire, and there was a period of time where, Voltaire actually lived at Frederick's court. Now, their relationship eventually soured, but Voltaire did spend some time over there and, did have Frederick as a patron for a time. Now, here is Frederick inspecting a potato harvest. Now, potatoes were kind of a new crop. This is part of the Columbian Exchange. They came from the old world. And so we think about like Ireland, Russia, other places like growing potatoes, but potatoes are a very calorie rich food. And so Frederick is introducing the potato, introducing this agricultural innovation. And so, that is one thing here that, he's introducing this new crop in Prussia. And so then Frederick engaged in civil service reform. Okay, so he reformed the Prussian bureaucracy. And so now men of non-noble birth could fill senior government posts. So now we have a meritocracy. Now, this is in line with the Enlightenment. This whole idea of a meritocracy, that the best person for the job should be in the job, not the person who has the best noble pedigree. This goes back, if you think about the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, in the sense that Jefferson is he is renouncing the idea of hereditary nobility here. And so then religious toleration. Okay, now Catholics still were discriminated against somewhat in the civil service, but Frederick had a very generous policy of religious toleration. And so, as Immanuel Kant said in his What is Enlightenment essay, the officer says, do not argue, drill. The tax collector, do not argue, pay. The pastor, do not argue, believe. Only one ruler in the world says, argue as much as you please, but obey. And so the thing is that Kant is saying here that Frederick the Great has created an atmosphere in Prussia where there is a discourse, there is a free discourse, and there is an academic freedom there in Prussia to argue and to question, as long as it does not threaten the state. And so, as far as that, there are some pitfalls here to this enlightened absolutism, because Frederick's primarily known, if you look here, what I saw when I looked him up online was Frederick II of Prussia, military commander. Okay, so Frederick was a fan of using aggressive warfare in order to meet his aims. Okay, now as far as that goes, Frederick is seen, I would say that consider Frederick your most important enlightened absolutist. And so from there, okay, come on. All right. So I was just trying to say that it started getting all crazy on me. Now, Catherine the Great of Russia. Okay, now Catherine the Great of Russia was able to do very, very little because to reform, because she really counted on the nobility, because she was probably, I mean, really much more than likely involved in her husband's assassination. And so, as far as that goes, Catherine was very dependent on the nobility, and so there's not going to be a great deal of reform of Russian institutions. All right, but she was very good at patronage. All right, so she heard that Denis Diderot, who was the editor of the encyclopedia, she heard that Denis Diderot was having a hard time financially, and so Catherine purchased Diderot's library and then paid him a salary to be her librarian. She said, I'm going to purchase your library, but keep the books and just tend to them for me. So this was her very creative way to patronize Diderot, which, remember, don't patronize me, we say, but this kind of patronage is good. And Voltaire, okay, so Catherine corresponded with Voltaire very, very regularly. Diderot actually went at one point to St. Petersburg to visit Catherine the Great because she was so good to him financially and wanted him to come see her. Now, again, absolutism. Okay, Pugachev's rebellion. So Pugachev's rebellion was an uprising of peasants and Cossacks on the Russian frontier, and this was put down very, very brutally. Okay, it was crushed. You see there where Pugachev is put into a cage and tortured. Of course, when you want to look at some POV analysis, Pugachev here is portrayed on a Soviet era postage stamp from 1973. And so that's something that we're seeing there. I don't know why that comment's there. It's really not needed. All right. So as far as that goes, Pugachev was basically, he was rebelling against the czarist regime here. And so the thing is, not a lot of reform going on because Catherine was dependent on the nobility. And of course, we hear a lot of stories about how Catherine died. None of those stories have ever been verified. So going on, that's not going to be on the exam, but just so you know. Now, Joseph II is the third of these enlightened absolutists. And Joseph II was the most radical and the least effective. And there is a lesson to be learned here, okay? Because a lot of times, like, one of the things about setting goals is that you should be setting goals that are attainable, because if you haven't set a goal that's attainable, then that's going to be problematic. Now, for a lot of his reign, he was a co-ruler with Maria Theresa. Now, he issued a religious toleration policy, a very generous policy that included private worship for Jews. So the Jewish population of his empire was then able to at least worship privately, okay, even though it didn't necessarily include public worship. Now, if you look at Joseph's empire, he was trying to figure out, how do I govern this multi-ethnic empire that is centralized here in this German-speaking Austria. And so as far as that, he tried some very ambitious reforms that were centralizing. He abolished serfdom and granted more rights to peasants. But at the same time, once he was done, once Joseph died, then Joseph's successors basically rolled back his reforms. And Joseph suggested that his epitaph on his tombstone read, "Here lies Joseph II, who failed in all he undertook." So that's something. So remember, Frederick was the most successful. Frederick the Great was the most successful of these enlightened absolutists. Then you've got Catherine the Great, who was really more about the show and tell kind of part of it. And then Joseph, who tried to do a whole lot, but then didn't get as much done. So remember, we see some combination of all of these people here, of toleration, of religion, reform of institutions, absolutism, and patronage of the philosophes. and that is Enlightened Absolutism. Let's see if we've got some more questions here. We've got a few more here. All right. So as far as that goes, let's see. Now, Thomas Hobbes, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes. All right. So it's well, wait. Okay, sorry, it marked that as answered. I don't know. All right, well, Kyle, I'm answering that right now, and I don't know why that's. Let's go ahead and reopen that topic. Okay. Oh, good. So I can close and reopen a topic. That's good to know. That's good to know. All right, so I think I'm answering the question on Thomas Hobbes, but I don't see it. All right, well, anyway, let's talk about Hobbes. Now, Hobbes, here we go. Okay, so we're going to start answering that. All right, so the social contract. Now, one thing to note in my video about Hobbes and Locke, I compare and contrast Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. And one thing to note is that both Hobbes and Locke are they're advocates of social contract theory. So both of them reject the idea of the divine right of kings. All right. So the divine right of kings is rejected by both of them. And so then, if you throw out the divine right of kings, you're left with the social contract. Now, the difference between Hobbes and Locke, okay, is that Hobbes believed that the purpose of the social contract is to keep us all from killing each other. That if we are that if we do not make a social contract, the state of nature is a state of war, every man against every man. Okay. Bellum omnium contra omnis. Okay. Everyone against everyone. And so with that, the point of making this was the point of making this whole thing was in order to keep us from killing each other. And so Hobbes, that's why Hobbes was an advocate of absolute government, okay? Because what we're going to need here is a strong leader who cannot be questioned. Because typically, when there is some sort of rebellion or something like that, a lot of times it's because the authority was weak, all right? That people saw weak authority, they saw an advantage, take advantage of it. So Hobbes says that that authority has to be so strong that nobody can question it. Okay, so that is really Hobbes' most influential idea. And remember, the context is the English Civil War. So Hobbes saw basically everything fall apart in front of him. All right, so going into that, what were John Locke's important ideas to note? Okay, which somebody said, Comrade Alexander says that John Locke was pretty sensible. Okay, that was one thing, that John Locke was an empiricist. And this is a little different from Descartes, for example. Okay, so Descartes was a rationalist. Descartes, believed that, he believed in Cartesian dualism, that you basically have a physical plane and a plane of the mind and the spirit and whatever you'd call it. Okay, so that's what's called Cartesian dualism. And because of Cartesian dualism, he's saying, because all of us can think about times when, your senses have played tricks on you. So Descartes saying that it's not like, if we think about this, that Descartes is saying that you can't you can't necessarily like, you can't sense everything, so you have to use your rational faculties, and if what you're seeing doesn't make sense, it's probably not real. Now, John Locke was a fan of tabula rasa, that Descartes believed in innate ideas, a priori, like innate ideas, whereas John Locke did not believe that there are independent ideas. Locke was a materialist, tabula rasa. Descartes would say that our brain already comes with stuff kind of pre-programmed in it. Tabula rasa, which means blank slate. That John Locke is saying here that basically the human mind, it doesn't come with like an operating system installed, okay? That it basically starts blank, and everything that's put into it is something that is from the senses. Whereas Descartes would say there's this kind of dualistic thing going in the mind, that there are already ideas in the mind that interact with the reality that we encounter. And so as far as that, that's one of John Locke's ideas, is the is the tabula rasa. The other one is natural rights theory. Okay, so while John Locke, like Hobbes, believed that a state of nature is not the most desirable place for people to be, John Locke also believed, though, that people are capable of making a government in order to protect their natural rights. So natural law or natural rights theory, that's a John Locke. That's a John Locke construct. And so what he's saying here is just because we would kill each other in a state of nature doesn't mean that we can't all come together and create a limited government to protect our life, liberty, and property. Okay, so that's really what Locke is getting into there. So his those are really Locke's most important ideas. Also, like Voltaire, he was a big advocate of religious toleration. Voltaire was actually very, very indebted to Locke and Newton. Okay, so when we think about John Locke and Isaac Newton, we're thinking about people who are kind of like the godfathers of the Enlightenment, but they're not really like in the Enlightenment. They're kind of like, they're sort of like, I mean, Locke and Newton are like John the Baptist to Voltaire and Diderot's Jesus Christ, which it's funny, Diderot probably wouldn't want to be compared to Jesus Christ. Voltaire wouldn't mind, as long as we're talking about Jesus Christ, the philosopher and human being who can't be divine, because that doesn't make sense to Voltaire. All right. Bridget, I'm having a little hard time here. What consists of absolute monarch? Okay, maybe what is absolute monarchy, something like that. All right, so as far as that goes, Bridget, absolute monarchy it's an alternative to feudalism. Okay, remember when we start this course, we're in this feudal system where you've got all of this kind of patchwork. Okay, so you've got the king who has their vassals, and then so they've also got to answer to the church, they've got to answer to a representative body. And so what absolute monarchs seek to do, think about a chess game. Okay, so you've got the king and queen, but then you've also got the bishop, which symbolizes the church. You've got the rook or the castle, which symbolizes the nobility. You've got the knights, which symbolize the gentry and the people who would be in the representative bodies. And so absolute monarchs are seeking to centralize administration, to reduce the influence of either reduce the influence or bring in the cooperation of the nobility and the church, and also not to have to answer to a representative body. A constitutional monarch is a monarch that is bound by law, and a monarch who answers on some level or another to a representative body. Okay, so no representative bodies there. That the influence of the church and the nobility is drastically reduced and doesn't get in the way of the king having their own program. Now, another part of this is having a standing army that is responsible to the monarch, not responsible to nobles and people like that. Okay, so when you look back at the Middle Ages, the king really didn't have a large personal standing army. They'd call on the nobility in order to fix that. All right, so finished answering that. All right, now quick one here, Bridget. Now the Petition of Right and the Pilgrimage of Grace, we're looking at the context. Okay, the Pilgrimage of Grace. Now both of these were protests against what they believed were abuses of power by the royal administration, and so the Pilgrimage of Grace was an effort it was a protest against Henry VIII abolishing the Catholic Church and selling the Catholic Church lands from the monasteries. Because remember that the monasteries in the Middle Ages, these were places where people were, when we think about the monasteries, this is, people would go there and spend the night. This is where they provide charity. People worked on the monasteries and stuff like that. So the monasteries had all this land, and then this land's going to go into private hands. This was a big part of people's lives. And so the Pilgrimage of Grace, this was something that was, I believe this was very heavily concentrated in northern England as well, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a protest against Henry VIII and his policies. Now, there were several people that were executed as a result of their being involved in that. The Petition of Right was a petition from Parliament to King Charles I, protesting what they believed to be illegal policies of his administration, not only a tendency toward absolute rule, but things like forced loans that, instead of now you can tax without approval, but also where the crown's like really leaning very heavily on someone for, hey, I need some money and you're going to give it to me, or loan it to me or something like that. So that was a petition by Parliament that was protesting the policy, the administration of Charles I. So in both of these cases, it is a protest on what is perceived to be an abuse of power by the monarch against traditional against things that were seen as traditional, but at different times and two different monarchs. All right, so let me go up here. Let's see. I think there's a question I'm not seeing because it's up there. Okay. Okay. Comrade Alexander, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just gonna have to delete that one. Okay, so yeah, I don't know what's going on there. How did the medieval cosmological view differ in the scientific revolution? Okay, so as far as that, now, when you think about the cosmology, okay, that the biggest thing the cosmology is going from geocentrism. Okay, so at the beginning of this course, like before the scientific revolution, from the time now, remember one thing we have to remember is people didn't believe at that point that the Earth was flat. Okay, so the Greeks and the Romans, they figured out, okay, the Earth is a sphere, it is a globe, but they believed that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that everything in the universe revolved around the Earth. And so that is geocentrism, Earth-centric, okay, having to do with the Earth. And so then what you're dealing with Copernicus and Galileo and the people who follow them is that a new type of cosmology is introduced where it is heliocentric, that everything's revolving around the sun. Now, of course, it gets a lot more complicated from that, that Newton realizes, this whole law of universal gravitation, that there's really like everything is spinning around something else. But yes, that before the scientific revolution, you had this geocentric view. And somebody actually asked about Tycho Brahe, which Tycho Brahe, what he tried to do was tried to kind of like combine Copernicus with Ptolemy. And so as far as that sort of thing, like to pull from both of them. So you had some kind of hybridization. But the reason I say why Tycho Brahe isn't like a big like deal on this exam is that it's like we don't really use, like, his stuff didn't really end up going anywhere. Okay, so it's really kind of its own its own thing there. And it's not really building on what happens later. So it's kind of irrelevant to this course, the person who asked about Brahe, but that's basically what I'd have to say about that. So yes, that's what you've got there. Now, the personal, so Charles I personal rule. This means that this was the period between like 1629 and 1640 that Charles I never called Parliament. So he tried his hand at ruling absolutely. Okay, so tried his hand at ruling absolutely. And that's where so essentially he tried his hand being an absolute monarch. And then in 1640 he had to call Parliament, needed money again, because remember, like today, Parliament meets at regular times. There are regular elections that are set by law. But at this time, like during the time of the Tudor dynasty, Then, and before that, Parliament was called whenever the king needed money. So the king needs money and needs permission because the Magna Carta said that taxation will be by consent, that the king will not tax the kingdom just out of nowhere, that the consent of the, of the nobility, representatives of the nobility, of the clergy, and also the gentry. Now, remember, the gentry this is the non-noble landowning class that still, really dominated the House of Commons in Parliament. So the House of Lords was dominated by the nobility and representatives of the Church of England, whereas the House of Commons, you had more of the gentry, these landowners that didn't have noble titles. And so what happened was, basically, if the king didn't need money, then there was no reason to call Parliament. So, and then like when Henry VIII went against the church, went against the Catholic Church, he got Parliament. He called Parliament. He just, okay, we're going to call a Parliament. And what I want you to do, Parliament, is I want you to say that the Church of England is no longer with Rome. Can you do that for me? And Parliament's like, yeah, we can do that for you. And that's what you had during the Tudor dynasty. All right. So as far as that goes, that's what you had before then. But Parliament is starting to assert itself more during the Stuart dynasty, and at a time when James the First, and Charles the First are trying to bring in absolute rule. So on one hand, James the First, Charles the First, the Stuart monarchs are trying to bring in absolute rule, and then at the same time that they're trying to do that, Parliament is asserting itself, and that's what leads to the English Civil War. All right, done with that one. Now, Bridget, I don't know what you're talking about here. Which one was the strongest? The three types of parliament, I'm not sure. Now, I'll go through a few parliaments from this time, okay? So you've got the short parliament and the long parliament, okay? Now, the short parliament is just called that because in 1640, Charles called for a parliament to be elected. He didn't like what he got. And so it didn't look like they were going to come to an agreement. And so Charles sent them home. And that's the thing, that at that time, the king called Parliament and then sent Parliament home. Now it's just symbolic. Like the Queen will read a speech at the opening session of a parliament today, but somebody else wrote the speech for her. She doesn't actually direct Parliament. And then when there's going to be an election, then the prime minister goes over to Buckingham Palace and asks the Queen to call an election. And it goes from there. And so you've got the short parliament, which Charles didn't like. And then he says, okay, so go home. And they go home. And then the long parliament is then elected. Charles doesn't like them either. Charles says go home, and they don't go home. Now, the long parliament is the parliament that is sitting during the English Civil War. And so that's this time where, that's basically Parliament and the king are at war. Now, what ends up happening during Cromwell's time is there is a purge of the moderate roundhead parliamentarian revolutionaries, whatever you want to call them. And so what's left over during Cromwell is the rump parliament, which is exactly what it sounds like. The rump, the behind, as my daughter would say, booty. All right. So, hey, Bridget. All right. Which Bridget's already here. She's asking questions, but now she's just saying hi. Okay. But the rump parliament is kind of like the hindquarters. It's like what's left over. And the rump parliament, this was only made up of Cromwell's loyalists. All right. So with that, we've got that one. And I am out of questions, ladies and gentlemen. I'm out of questions, which I'm fine with going to bed if that's what y'all want to do. It's getting of course, the World Series is on. Go Dodgers, right? I hope none of y'all are from Boston and got like offended or something and don't do Fiveable again anymore. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, some of y'all are, subscribed to Fiveable, or your teachers are. Remember that you want to, if you're not subscribed to Fiveable through yourself or through your teacher, you want to go to fiveable.me and you want to subscribe to Fiveable, because at some point these weekly broadcasts will start being for subscribers only. All right. So with that, do we have any more questions? Last call. Let me go ahead and just sit here for a second, and we will see if any questions might materialize here. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right. Give you just a second to bring any questions in if you've got them. If you've got them. All right. All right. Are we seeing any questions? Let's see. Let's see. All right. We've got a question. All right. Nora, the subscription, they started out as a monthly subscription, but this is a brand new company. They've been looking around at that. Now, if you subscribed when they were doing the monthly fee, that I believe should have been changed to where it was just a flat fee of $15 that covers you for the whole year. Okay. So that should be that. The pragmatic sanction. Okay. Now, Kyle, yeah, and remember, yeah, I have nothing to do with Fivables billing or anything like that. So I just work here. All right, the pragmatic sanction. Okay, so Kyle, as far as that goes, that's one of those that gets into Austria, and so that's like one of those things that I'm really not that clear on. But I think the good news is you're probably pretty unlikely to find that on the newly redesigned exam. But from what I remember of that, that's the one where basically it allowed a woman, I guess Maria Theresa, to take over from there. So, which pragmatic, this is basically because we need to. Okay. So the pragmatic sanction of 1713. Okay. And this kind of shows you how obscure this is. This isn't like one of the big topics. Yeah. So let's chat about that. Let's just go and I'll show you how I do these. Okay. So when I'm looking at some of these more obscure over here, open up my friend Wikipedia. And so we see here that essentially they could be inherited by a daughter. Okay, so what's going on here is there was no son to inherit, and so you got to figure. Okay, so then he was ultimately seated by Maria Theresa, and then I'm guessing that this is what resulted in the War of yeah, so the War of the Austrian Succession. Okay, so Maria Theresa takes over, and then you've got the War of the Austrian Succession. And so with that, okay, so the war, okay, so what do we see here from the War of the Austrian Succession? Okay. Okay, so at the end of that, Maria Theresa is stays on the Austrian throne. Okay, this is the Queen of Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia, but her husband is the Holy Roman Emperor. So she's not able to be the Holy Roman Emperor, but she does actually end up staying on the throne. Okay, so yes, this did lead to the War of the Austrian Succession. Okay, so yeah, it was about whether a woman could inherit the throne if necessary because they had this issue. And then that turned into a war as things obviously did, they did quite a bit in Europe at that time. All right. Yeah, as you can see here, Kyle, one of the reasons that I took you through that exercise is because I want you to realize that this is really not like a major topic on the exam. Now, also, Bridget, another thing, like the New Model Army, besides understanding that was Cromwell's army, those were the Roundhead, that was the Roundhead parliamentarian army associated with Cromwell. You really don't, we're really going beyond the scope of the exam when we get into that. Now, the two theories of government, what are we talking about? Bridget, go ahead and edit your question and be a little more specific. All right. Now, the debates on the nature of women during the scientific revolution. Now, the biggest thing that you're going to run into on the woman question is actually going to be, Rousseau during the Enlightenment. Okay. Because the thing is that the traditional view of women, and if you look at my Women in the French Revolution series, you're going to see something there worthwhile. Okay. So, can I talk about debates? Yeah, the nature of women. So basically, when we say that somebody's being hysterical, all right, We also were using the same term as somebody who is like getting a hysterectomy. Okay, so when we tell somebody they're being hysterical, what we're really saying in terms of semantics is that you're acting like a woman. Okay, so it's like somebody's being hysterical, they're acting like a woman. That women, in order to justify keeping women out of the public sphere, then you say that, okay, women are not capable of thinking rationally like men. Okay, so women are not capable of rational thought like men. They are just easily led around, and they should not be in the public sphere. They should not be in positions of leadership. Now, so you've got Rousseau, who says that basically, like, look, a woman is made to please a man, and a woman should not have the same education as a man, that a woman should be educated to fill her role in the private sphere. Now, of course, remember that the Enlightenment was really, in a lot of ways, about making these inquiries, and not really with any kind of eye to political correctness or anything like that. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft, okay, who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Man before writing A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, Mary Wollstonecraft said that, you say that, okay, women have never really been successful in the public sphere, but women also don't have the same opportunities. They're not being educated. They're not being offered the same education or the same training or anything. So women have never been able to really get a fair shake in these things. Okay, so as far as that's concerned, that would be, I think, look at Rousseau and Wollstonecraft during the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, respectively. All right. So as far as that goes, Bridget, what we're looking at there is absolutism versus constitutionalism. Okay. And remember that constitutionalism is the idea of a limitation of government by law. So when we ask, like, what does the Constitution do? Okay. The Constitution limits government. So the United States Constitution sets boundaries for our government. And so any constitution does that. So absolute monarchy, the monarch only answers to God. And so when the monarch dies, they've got to go to the judgment and be judged. But a constitutional monarch, they have to answer to a representative body, typically. So, or a body of laws, that there are limits that are willfully placed on the monarch. So absolute monarchy versus constitutional monarchy. All right, sounds like Kyle might be working on a DBQ, or who knows. But as far as that, there are a few things that are leading to the decline of the Dutch Republic. Now, one thing is that the Dutch, there are two reasons. Like when you think about constitutionalism, in England, they're not on the continent. They had a strong navy. So they didn't really need an absolute monarchy. And so they didn't develop one. Now, the Netherlands, really, part of the reason why the Netherlands really never had like an absolute monarchy is because they didn't, in order to have an absolute monarchy, you've really got to have a proper nation. And so, they really weren't ever able to put together a nation. It was, okay, I'm not answering a DBQ. There's actually a DBQ topic that's a lot like this. So they never really put together a proper nation. It was really more of like the United States under the Articles of Confederation kind of thing. And so that's one thing, that they never really put together like a proper functioning govern, like a unitary state. Another thing is wars. Okay, that Louis the 14th was really. It's just when you're going to war with the greatest, like Louis the 14th went to war with the Netherlands, and although he didn't conquer the Netherlands, that was very expensive for them. I mean, imagine if the United States went to war with like Australia. Okay, I never want to go to war with Australia, and I know a lot of great people from Australia. But the thing is that if the United States and Australia went to war, it's like Australia would have to put a lot more of its resources into that war. And so that's another thing. Now, then they just started, I think that other people kind of got woke when it came to trade. And so the Dutch weren't, of course, they were having to put so much money in the war that they weren't able to put as much into trade. And that was really their bread and butter, how they were, getting what they were getting. All right. So as far as that is concerned, yeah, I think we're finished answering that one. Okay. So a good way to prepare any test strategies. Okay, we're kind of getting late here. I would say now, actually, there is Bridget. I've got a video how to survive an AP Euro. That's on Fiveable's YouTube channel. So go to Fiveable's YouTube channel and go ahead and click on that, and you'll see that video, how to survive an AP Euro. And there are some test strategy things I get into here and there, like went on my own channel and through my own services. But yeah, so I would take a look at that video, how to survive in AP Euro. All right, so yeah, Kyle, when it comes to Baroque art, I would put that. I would put, yeah. So, Nora, that's another thing. Y'all stay in touch because, yes, Amanda actually does some sessions that are intentionally targeted toward test taking and the like. So, yeah, make sure definitely, take a look when you see that Amanda's going to do some kind of like thing like that. I think that's a good idea. Now, what I would say about Baroque art, I wouldn't say that I would associate Baroque art with absolutism and the Counter Reformation. Okay, like so I've got a two-part lecture on Baroque art. I would look at absolutism and the Counter Reformation. That would be my advice to you. I would. Now, one thing that I might note. I wonder if they consider like Rembrandt's like anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp, like if that may be kind of a Dutch Baroque or something like that. But yeah, I would say though Counter Reformation would be a much closer thing there. All right. And then the wars of religion. Okay. Now, the wars of religion, I've got videos on my channel about both of these. The French wars of religion, of course, you've got the French Catholics versus the Huguenots. And you don't have to know a whole lot about this stuff. Know what a Huguenot is, that's a French Calvinist, that they were a religious minority in France. You had, Catherine de Medici, and on one side, and the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the Catholics killing Protestants. Also, what you've got here, you've got the politique. Okay, so politique is really the biggest takeaway from this. Okay, politique, or as one of my students has said before, politicue. Okay, like he calls it politicue, and I guess you can call it what you want it, right? What you want to. And so politicue, he said, and I was like, okay, it's a written test, right? And so Henry of Navarre, who became Henry IV of France, was a politique. And so he was a Huguenot leader, but he was in a position to become king of France. And when he had a chance to become king of France, then he said, Paris is worth a mass. All right. Paris is worth a mass. So if I need to convert to Catholicism, I'm going to. Remember, politique is about putting the needs of the country ahead of the needs of religion. And so politique is really about like, look, the country, having peace in the country is more important than some sort of religious orthodoxy or everybody being Catholic. Now, I have a video on Fiveable's channel. And in fact, you know what? Let me go into here and take you on a little ride here. Okay, so youtube.com think Fiveable. And let me go into, let's take a look at their playlist. All right. AP European History. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring you to this page. I'll give you all the link. And so what this has got here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, just had a quick brain freeze there, but we're good. Let me go ahead and give y'all this here, because I've got a video that I've got on the Edict of Nantes. Okay, so that's my most recent video here channel is about the Edict of Nantes. So I've got a review of Renaissance humanists, Protestant reformers, and the Edict of Nantes. And then, as I mentioned before, I've got this How to Survive AP Euro. Okay, so I've got some tips there on just basically this is stuff that you can do that's going to, that's going to be helpful to you there. Okay, so as far as that is concerned, I would take a look at this video on the Edict of Nantes. Okay, it's a good, it's a good one there. All right, so going from there, ladies and gentlemen, can I dab? Sure, why not? Right, ready? All right. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I can do the dab. All right. And why not? Why not? Y'all are y'all are here. I'm here. The other one's the 30 Years War, which I've also got a video on the 30 Years War. So you want to make sure to take a look at that video. So the 30 Years War, of course, in the Holy Roman Empire. And that is, I mean, that's really something that's going to take a lot longer to talk about. But remember, it begins less it begins more of a local religious war and becomes like a very political and continental war. But I go into more into that. Remember, youtube.com/Tom Ritchie to get to my channel. And which y'all should be all there already anyway, right? Y'all should all be subscribed to my channel. And so as far as that goes, I've got an extensive list of AP Euro videos there to get more into that. Remember, Gustavus Adolphus is your most important one. And remember, how is politique working in the 30 Years War? So France, which had already been through its own wars of religion and had adopted that politique mindset, Cardinal Richelieu was someone who was very instrumental in making, deciding France was going to side with the Protestants, not with the Catholics. And so France was going to choose what was best for France politically rather than what was best for the religious majority of France and Catholicism. All right, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, remember that next week we're going to broadcast on Tuesday. So make sure to be ready for that. We're not going to be broadcasting on Wednesday. It's going to be on Tuesday. All right. So with that, I will go ahead and sign off, and I will look forward to seeing y'all next week on Tuesday. It's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, and you're welcome.